Hello friends, this is Christopher Davis-Shannon. When we're playing music, we tend to play in specific keys. And each key has its own set of chords that are most commonly used in there. And if we know these chords, then learning songs becomes a lot easier. So let's look at a chord progression to internalize all of these commonly used chords within any given key. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is, why do these chords exist and why are they commonly used? And the answer is that they are all built off of our major scale. Now, obviously, we will continually be borrowing chords from other keys and using little tricks such as secondary dominance to get places where we need to go in the progression. But these chords that are built just off of the major scale will really give us most of the information that we need, although not all. So when we look at a major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, we can build a chord off of each scale degree by stacking thirds. So we see with our C major chord, if we just skip a note and put the next one on top, we end up with C, E, and G. And that gives us our standard C major chord. Now we can do that and we can take it and put it over every single other scale degree and see what chords naturally occur. And this is what happens. But there's not many times in songs that we actually play in scale order all of the chords. So let's put this in context of a chord progression that's going to contain harmonic movements that we'll see in common practice. So what I've done here is actually taken two chord progressions that we see very commonly in Western music of the last 100 years or so and put them together with just a couple modifications. We're going to start out on a C major chord on our 1 chord, the tonic, and then we're going to go down to the 6th chord, an A minor. This change works well because they share a lot of harmonic information with each other, a lot of common tones. And then we're going to an F, our 4 chord. And many times you've probably played a progression like this and gone to a G7th, our 1, 6, 4, 5 progression. But here we're going to use a B diminished chord instead, which is just going to be a G7th without the G string. So you're really going to hear a G7th here. We don't use diminished triads very often, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, normally from here we'd resolve to a C, right? But instead of that, we're going to go to an E minor chord, our 3 chord. And we can look at this and we can see that it actually shares 2 notes with the C major chord. We have our E and our G in here. So that's why we can resolve to this and it doesn't sound off. It just sounds as if it's taking us elsewhere. And then we have our 1 repetition, this chord progression. We're going back to the 6th chord, our A minor chord. And now we're going to go to D minor, our 2 chord, to create a 2-5-1 progression. I'm going to link to my video on 2-5 progressions and why they're important and why you should know them. So our D minor, our 2 chord, over to G major, and then that brings us back to C. So let's try this whole progression together and see how it sounds. Just 4 simple down strums on each chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. C, A minor, F, to B diminished, now E minor, A minor, D minor, to G. And you hear that just brings us right back to the top of the form, and we can just repeat this exercise as many times as we need until these chords are really under our fingers. Now the key to this is these movements between chords, going from a 1 chord to a 6 chord or a 6 chord to a 4 chord, are very common ones that we're going to see. So you'll see this crop up in a lot of tunes that you play, and you'll already be familiar with these chord changes. Now let's look at what happens if we add the 7th to each of these chords. So much as we built the basic triads, the 3-note chords, by just stealing notes from our major scale, we're just going to add one additional one now. So if we look at our C major chord again, we know that we have C, E, and G, and our 7th here would be a B. So this gives us a C major 7th. Now, just like with the triads, we can build up each scale degree and see the 7th chord that naturally occurs in the key. So now let's take these 7th chords, because we do play quite a bit of 7th chords on uke in many styles of music, and apply it to the same chord progression we were just using. So this C becomes a C major 7th now. And then our 6th chord, our A minor, we're going to add a G to it. That's going to become an A minor 7th, which we can just play all open. And then we're going to play an F major 7th as our 4 chord. I use this voicing because it's really the same as this one on high G, but much easier to play. Feel free to use any voicing for these chords you want. We don't have to use the fingerings or the specific voicings that I'm using here. And then our B diminished chord is going to become a B diminished 7th. So you're just taking a G 7th, adding an A flat to it. Right? And this is the more common diminished chord that we're going to see. As I mentioned earlier, we don't see a lot of diminished triads. Diminished 7ths are really much more important in music. And then we go from this B diminished 7th to an E minor 7th. And then back to A minor 7th, but we'll use a different voicing here just to shake things up a little bit. Use this one. There are 2 chords is a D minor 7th to G 7th. So now let's try this entire progression together. 1, 2, 3, 4, C major 7th, A minor 7th, F major 7th, B diminished 7th, E minor 7th, A minor 7th, D minor 7th, G 7th. Good, now if you memorize this progression, you'll be set up to play most songs in the key of C and probably only have to look up a few chords along the way that are not in the key, these naturally occurring chords. Now I've written up this same exact progression in 4 different keys over on Patreon so that you can practice this in the most utilized keys on ukulele. I'll see you all over there.